Okay.
So, uh, so we're talking about SPSS, which is the first software that we are going to cover. And when you talk about SPSS, first, why SPSS? Okay, I'm sure you're in the field of M&D, so you have interacted with surveys before, and SPSS is one of those tools that are commonly used, uh, and this is because of the friendly environment. So, what is SPSS? SPSS stands for Statistical Package for Social Science. So, most individuals or individuals who are in the discipline of social sciences, they tend to prefer SPSS for their analysis as compared to maybe other softwares like maybe R, which is a bit technical. So here you're bringing a social scientist who needs to just conduct his survey, and now there's the analytical part of it, and SPSS became now the bridge between now the technical part of it and the research and survey part of it. I hope that makes sense. So, like I said, SPSS stands for Statistical Package for Social Science. So it's preferred by social science guys. So when you're doing your project, because I know project planners, M&D, we also have economists, the nature of the survey that we do, SPSS has turned out to be one of the most useful tools for that. So I don't want to discuss more about exactly the software part of it, because I know you will be able to read this document that I'm presenting. I know you have a copy with you, so you should be in a position to go ahead and read at your own free time. So, how have I structured this class? I'll basically divide this class into three main areas, and I know, like I said, I don't like doing PowerPoint presentation. I want us to flow. So, at some point when you will feel like there's some things that you have, I think I recommended if you have questionnaires that maybe later you'd want us to use in class, I'm more than open for that. So the way I'm thinking of conducting this class, I will organize into three main areas. One, we will look at the data entry part, we'll go to data management, and then lastly, data analysis. So those are three main areas. In terms of data entry, we will look at the primary sources. Like we see, if you're interacting directly with a respondent, you're conducting a survey. How do you process that information from now the fieldwork uh, to now the software? Whereby now you're saying, how can I enter data into an SPSS as a software of analysis? Uh, so I will show you both the traditional method. So we say, assuming you've printed out questionnaires, you have pieces of papers with you, you're going out there manually. How would you have gone about that kind of scenario, whereby you will have now to transfer the response that you have collected from now the piece of papers that you have to your SPSS software. So that's what I refer as traditional method. Uh, we'll also do electronic, and I know this is where you are maybe more interested. But now you say we don't want to print papers because of challenges that comes with printing papers. Of course, we'll discuss that. So again, we say, is it possible for us to do all this process using now an electronic platform? And we will now dive in into Kobo, whereby now we say we have this questionnaire. Now let's put it in an electronic platform, and then we see if you can roll out the same process of data collection. Uh, because now when you're using electronic, it means you will combine both the data entry process and the collection process. Okay, I hope this makes sense. So, of course, we'll have a chance to look at that. So that's an overview of data entry. Now, once we capture now this data, now we say, how are we going to make sense out of now the information that we want? So, of course, you're doing this survey because you have an objective. So we'll also try and see the entire process. Like, how do you come up with the variables that truly reflect your objective. Okay, so it's more like a research process, the normal way you conduct a research. So we'll try and borrow that, whereby now I say, okay, can we download now this information that you have collected, maybe from the server? Now again, we say we're doing it in SPSS. So in SPSS, I will also be teaching you on how to work, how to import an Excel file. If I'm moving fast, you let me know. If I'm all over the place, you also communicate to me. So what I'm
Okay.
saying here is we have two processes of collecting data. So I've just touched on primary, whereby I say maybe you're going to the field, you're interacting with a respondent. Two, if you have collected this data in a server or it's stored in a platform, of course you will download it, and when you download it, you will have it as an Excel file. So the second part, still under data entry, we'll try and see how do you work with Excel to SPSS. Okay, now that's what I'll be referring as secondary sources. So primary, of course, I've mentioned. So now let's come into data management. And in management, of course, now that we will use electronic platform, we will regulate a lot that we're going to collect, because now that is the power of using electronic platform. But again, assuming you are not using an electronic platform, so you had pieces of paper that you use for collection of data, you maybe hired some research assistant who were doing some sort of data entry that is transferring now the answers from the piece of paper to your software. So what happens during that process is all about speed, like how fast can a research assistant key in data. And there's now chances of mistakes being made there. So we are not going to analyze this data directly without cross-checking. So data management is basically preparing your data before you say, now I'm rolling out the analysis process. Why is that important? In an event that there's a mistake that was done during data entry, you will be able now to make sure it's not captured during your analysis, or it doesn't affect the final output of your work. So that is why we will see how do you prepare your data. Can you be able to merge files? Can you be able to check for duplicates and so forth? So there's a bunch of stuff that you're going to do. And like I said, you can always read that document that I'm presenting. So after we have done with data management, because I don't want to go into each of the areas, I want us at least to go into now the practical part of it. We see what we can do today. So let me touch on the last part, which is very important, data analysis. So data entry, data management, lastly now, data analysis. In terms of analysis, we will break down into two main areas. One, we will look at the descriptive part of it, whereby we say, okay, how can we describe our data? And the descriptive part of it depend with the structure of your variables. Are you dealing with categoricals? Are you dealing with continuous variable? What are the rules of analyzing or describing this? What are the rules of describing a categorical? So here we will borrow a lot, things like extraction of frequency table. For continuous, we will look at measures of central tendency. So again, we go back and remind ourselves, what does it mean when you have standard deviation? What type of insights can you get from standard deviation? So we just, of course, I'm not telling us that we're now going to do those calculations, but again, if you get a figure of, let's say, 7.9 as your standard deviation, what does that mean? Okay, so that is all about descriptive analysis. So just to emphasize, I've said the analysis part, we're breaking down into two: the descriptive, and then we have the inferential. For descriptive, we've said what is going to guide us is how your questions are structured, the ones I'm now referring as variable. Now, the last part is inferential, now that you will know how to do descriptive. And with inferential, this is where you're trying to check relationship. You've done your survey, and then you have your variables. So you want to know, how does one variable relate to another? Okay. So there are a bunch of tests that you're going to do, and let me just mention. We will go through some stages of conducting a scientific process. And one, we will learn the first thing is we'll know how do we come up with test statistics. We'll do that. And what it means here is if you're checking relationship, how do you know the type of test that you need to do for you to do a scientific process to check relationship? Because what I mean here is when you conduct a research, it's a global thing. You cannot say this one is a research that is only understood in Kenya. No, that's not how it works. So if you do a study here in Kenya, it means somebody in China should be able to read your work and understand. So what does that mean? It means there's a universal process that have been accepted now for communication in a scientific world. I hope I'm communicating something here. So what are these processes that we are going to look at? So one, we said we will look at how to identify the test statistics. Step number two, we will look at how to formulate hypotheses. Step number three, we will look at how to come up with confidence level. Step number four, we need to make decision. So up there, we have just talked about hypothesis. So in an event that you have a null hypothesis and an alternative, uh, how can you settle for one? So that is the whole process. So I know it sounds more like an academic work, but it will enable us to understand better on how to handle data analysis. So like I said, those are the 5 steps under inferential analysis. So unless you have a question, I want to go now straight into the first thing that we will cover today, which is now interacting with the software, and also if possible we can do data entry. So like I said, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and then I'll give you a chance to communicate, or you can also write on the comment section. So how do you interact with the software? So the software is already installed on your side, and if you go to your search icon, so the left bottom corner, just go to your search icon. I'm also sure you're seeing the right screen. Okay, so if you go to just go to the normal place you search for all the application in your computer, and I want you to search for SPSS. I find it important that I don't work under any assumption. So whether you're already good with computers, I don't know, but I feel, let me just introduce everything starting from how to access the software. So the software has already been installed for you. So of course, in most instances, you realize the IT guys will handle the installation part. So it's not a must you know how to install softwares. But if you want to do that, want to know, it's a very easy step. So we gave the ones we downloaded. So that folder contains the files for installation. So on your side, you've already been installed the software. So your job is just to go and search for the software so that you start using it. And I said, if you go to the left bottom corner, just write, okay, depending on the Windows you're using, but search for SPSS, and you will see SPSS. I'm not so sure why I'm not seeing anything on my side. So there's the SPSS with the summation. So you'll see 2 of them. So if you're not having it somewhere in your taskbar down here, then it's necessary for you to do this process. But if you can see your SPSS somewhere in your taskbar, then you don't need to search again. So what I'm saying here is I want you to pin your SPSS in your taskbar so that it will be much easier for you to use it.
It's already pinned.
So let's open it. to, when you open it, just double click once or twice and then give it time. It might take a while before you see anything happening on your screen. And if you have clicked it more than like several times, several instances of the same will be open at the background. So you realize if you're not using a good machine, it may end up maybe hanging. Okay. So what I'm saying here is just double click, be patient, give it time. You'll be able to see something like what I'm presenting to you. Now, let's talk about the interface before we also dive into maybe the tools that you're going to use. So if you look at the first interface that you're having here, even though we will not be using this with the interface you're seeing, but at least let's understand it. Now, the first option is run a tutorial. Basically means the software comes with tutorials. So at some point, if you'll need to read on your phone, it means you can be able to access the tutorials. So at your own free time, you will click on the runner tutorial and it will take you now to their website whereby you'll be able to access those materials. That's for learning purposes. There's an option of type in data. And for typing data, like I said, not so useful for us, but at some point, there was a time people used to copy paste. What I mean here is you have data in Excel and you want to use the SPSS for analysis, and people used to copy that data from Excel to SPSS. Of course, there were challenges that came with that such an action. That means you are copying the format of Excel into SPSS. Now again, it will take you forever just to make adjustment on the different formats. I think that's why I mentioned that we will learn the best way to import Excel file. So nowadays, nobody is going to type in data using this interface here. The last two, we have an option of running an existing query or creating a query using a database wizard. Let me just mention about this. So I know the scope of this class. Okay. Check on your taskbar. You should be having, just confirm if you're having two interfaces open, but you can still close it and open again. Then you see if you're going to see both of the interface.
I can only see the one that says data set 0 IBM. This I don't love this small little one. Even is it the variable 0 or whatever? I am only seeing one taskbar.
No pressure, since you'll be using the software more often. So I think maybe the next time you'll open it, you'll be able to see this one, even though we're not going to use it. So let me just skim through it, and then we get done, and then at some point when you have a chance to see it, at least you'll not be surprised. So I'm bringing in the context of a database. And why is this important? I know it's beyond the scope of this class, but maybe you work with an organization that has that some languages. For example, is SQL. So for for you to access a database, you will write those language. Okay, so that's what we are referring here as query. So if you already have a script, I know maybe I'm using some terminology that are not really common, but now what I'm saying here is there's a programming language that is used to access data from a server. So what your IT people will do is they will need to connect SPSS with that server. So there are two things here. One is the database language, and the other one is
I
an
lost you
existing
at
query.
your
That is,
IT
if they already
guys.
have those query with you. So query will take you to an interface whereby you'll be able to write some query to access a database. Okay. So I was emphasizing that it's beyond the scope of someone who understands data analysis. So the part of running an existing query or creating a new query is the job of the IT department. Okay, so we have those database managers or database administrators. Now, once they write for you, so if they already have code, now they'll just run an existing code like query. That's it, queries are just codes. If they don't have, they have a chance to create a new one using the other interface. So like I said, it's beyond, it's not even your job, so don't worry about that side. So let me just close this interface because we're not going to use it. Now, this is where we'll spend a lot of our time. So make sure on your side you can see, or whatever you're seeing is exactly what I'm presenting. Kindly confirm.
The untitled Excel sheet looks like an Excel sheet or something. Yes, I have what you have on the screen.
Perfect. So if you have what I'm having on my screen, then I'm good to go. Now, we're going to use the questionnaire that I'm having. We'll use my tool, and maybe if you, after today's class, if you have maybe a different tool that you want us to use, you're more than welcome. Under the folder download, there's a folder again called SPSS. So that is where we're going to get the questionnaire that I'm going to use in class. To your desktop, open SPSS. So there's the folder for questionnaires, and the questionnaire that we're going to use is NSSF contributor. So it's a Word document. Confirm if you have it.
Okay, let's see. So I open SPSS. Okay, NSSF, the Word document, not the Excel one, right?
Correct.
Okay, correct.
Perfect. So, like I said, we're going to assume we're doing a manual one, like the traditional process. So, if you have this questionnaire, how do you go about the entire process of now having it into SPSS as your tool for analysis? That's where we're going to start. So, I think it's a straightforward questionnaire. So, just to put it into context, you can check on the introduction part. We're saying what there's an organization that is meant to do some customer satisfaction survey. So the idea here is we just need a data collection tool. Okay. So now what do we need to know? Let's understand some few terminologies, and then we dive in into now the process of coding the questionnaire. There are four terminologies that we have to be comfortable with. So one, we need to know what is a variable. Two, we need to know what is a case. Three, we need to know what is a variable view. And lastly, we'll have to know what is data view. Let me repeat that. We need to know what is a variable. We need to know what is a case. we need to understand variable view. We also need to know data view. Let's start with a variable. We can define variables as attributes or characteristic of a population that a researcher is interested to understand. We can define variables as characteristics of a population that a researcher is interested to understand. So we put it into context. You have a population, regardless of where that population is. Whether you're doing a need assessment, you're doing a baseline survey, whatever, that means you've already identified your population. So there are things about that population that you want to know. That's what I refer here as variables. So in short, what I'm saying here is variable are basically the questions in a questionnaire. So if you want to understand maybe the gender distribution of your population, then gender is a variable. So you'll have gender as a question in your questionnaire. You want to the age distribution, you will have it as a question. So age is a variable. Why? Because you're interested to understand the distribution. Talk to me.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we're good. We know what a variable is. If you
Mm-hmm.
have a variable, which I've said a variable is a question, then you expect
Mm-hmm.
answers, right?
Yes.
So the answers that you get from your variables are the ones that we refer as cases. Okay, so variables are questions, cases are the answers. In other softwares, sometimes people call them response. We have others who will call them observation. But now, in the context of SPSS and this class, we will be referring answers as cases, variables as questions. Now, the next two, we need to know what is variable view and what is data view. Now, if you go now to the software,
Mm-hmm.
if you check here, we have the variable view section and the data view section. So those are the two main interfaces that we will be interacting with.
Yes, I can see that.
What is variable view? Variable view is now the interface where we will code the variables. Data view is the interface where you will code the cases. Let's define data entry. Now, data entry is now the process whereby you're transferring observation from a research instrument to your data view. Or if you don't want to call it data view, you can just say the process of transferring now observation or cases, or you can call them answers, from a research instrument to your software. It can be this. So when we say the first thing you're going to learn in this class is data entry, I meant that we will first learn how do we transfer information from now this questionnaire, which is the NSSR
Mm-hmm.
contributor tool, now to our software, which is SPSS. Then we
Mm-hmm.
see if it comes out of those data.
Okay.
Now, let's interact with the questionnaire. And I'm curious, so I have a question for you. What do you think is the role of serial number in this questionnaire? Why do we have serial number there?
For identification, maybe.
Right. So what you're telling me is serial number is only useful for the field work or the operation during the data collection process. You're not going to sit down and say you're analyzing serial number. It doesn't make sense to tell me that
Yeah.
the mean serial is 20. I will look at you in the
Mm-hmm.
eyes. So what am I going at here? So we have information that you're not necessarily going to analyze them. So one of them is serial number. Another one is date of interview. We have name of the interviewer. So the information that are only useful for the data collection processes, we have a terminology for that. So we call them metadata. And if you're doing the traditional method, you're not going to code metadata. That information was only useful during the data collection process.
Mm-hmm.
So serial number, we're not going to code it because we're not going to do data entry for serial number unless otherwise. If somebody maybe has really emphasized that, hey, I need serial numbers to be captured in the data set, then well and good. But if that's
Is
not the
that the
case,
same? Is that the same as unique identifiers, or that's different? Like
that
unique
is
number. That's different.
interesting. So it's a unique identifier in as far as the questionnaires are concerned. And
Okay.
uh, now I know I've maybe let's talk about it. So when I mentioned that it, metadata are only useful during the data collection process, maybe the question you need to ask yourself is what was the role of maybe each of the metadata. So if you
Mm-hmm.
ask me, for instance, the number in this case, I will say one, it is a unique identifier. That means
Mm-hmm.
it will be used to identify the questionnaires, like which questionnaire is this and where did it come from. So maybe I know certain serial numbers are from a certain area,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's in that context. Okay, yeah, it identified the questionnaire. Okay, but I was thinking like maybe how do you what I okay, I know I'm a programmer. So when you say a unique identifier, are you identifying the respondent? Of course, yeah, again the respondent is still the questionnaire,
Yeah.
but there are better way of identifying a respondent, like maybe their ID. You can maybe give them some sort of ID, or maybe their phone number or their name. But again, you're raising. So when you're saying the identifier, I think name of the maybe you ask them their name, which is not a good thing, because of course we'll have to discuss on confidentiality. Maybe people don't want to give out their names. So, but anyway,
I get the difference. I get the difference now. Because unique identifier is basically, as you said, like if I don't want to get the people's name, then I just assign them a unique number, a unique identifier. But I think serial number is now different. I think I get the difference.
perfect. So
Yeah, thanks.
we're not going to start coding serial number. We leave it at
Mm-hmm.
behind. So let's go. If you're to roll out a data collection process, where do you start? So we're going to start with the variable that is part of an objective. I think
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned this earlier. So something like gender. Gender is part of
Yeah.
the objective of the survey. So we're going to
Mm-hmm.
start with gender. Now
Mm-hmm.
the question is how to code a variable. So we have two ways of coding a variable. Either you will use a question number because each questions are unique, or
Mm-hmm.
you can assign names to those variables.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in this
Yeah.
class, let's assign names to each of the variable. So for instance, gender, we just call it gender. A different question, we'll try and see how to give it a name. So
Mm-hmm.
remember I mentioned variable view is the interface you code your variables. So
Yeah.
I will come to the name part, and then now I'll give it a name. So my first variable will be gender. Okay. Now we know what is a variable. How about we talk about the types of variable that exist? Of course, there are several variables, but how about we just concentrate on in two of them? One, we have variables that we refer to them as numeric, and then we
Mm-hmm.
have variables that we will refer to string. So if you check the next column, just click towards the end of the box or that cell. This window interface will pop up. If you look here, we have a lot, but like I said, I want us to concentrate on numeric and string. What's the
Okay, so
difference
you lost me. So I
when you say
click at the end where, like, at the end of the cell with where I've written gender.
no, no, no? So the next column is so actually we're going through all these columns. So the next one is type.
Yeah, yeah.
So towards the end, so somewhere here where my cursor is at the moment,
So a minute. Where is your cursor? Okay, like a Dropbox. Okay, okay.
yeah, almost towards the end of that cell. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Base
So
numeric, comma, dot. Yeah, I get that.
perfect. So what are we doing at the moment? So when we want to tell the software what type of a variable is gender, because we have just said gender is so the next thing that the software wants to know is, okay, you've given me a name. So what type of first? What is the difference between the two?
Mm-hmm.
That the type of response that you get that are in numbers, they fall
Mm-hmm.
under the type numeric.
Yeah,
Example, I ask you your age, you tell me 20. 20 is a number,
mm-hmm.
so age is a numeric
Numeric.
type of a variable.
Okay.
We talk about string. Now, all variables that the answers you get are in alphabetic characters, now they fall under the type string. A good
Mm-hmm.
example, I ask you your name, you tell me George. George contain alphabetic characters, so name as a variable will fall under the type string.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about gender. So if you were to ask someone about gender, or I don't know if you observe or you ask, I think that's subject to a debate. But if you observe, for instance, gender, you can say they are male or female.
Mm-hmm.
So male or female, those are alphabetic characters, right? So
The string.
based on our definition, we will say now gender is a string. That's very
Yeah.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's go deeper. This is a conversation between a human being and a human being. George and Florence are having a conversation. We understand English. We can flow when you say male and female.
Mm-hmm.
But things will change when you now go and say, okay, let me now communicate to a SPSS. SPSS is a computer. How do you tell a computer that there's a group called male, there's another group called female? So we will have to introduce numbers or values so that the software will be able to know there's a difference between a male and a female.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm communicating something.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
so we'll say let the value of 1 denotes someone who's a male, let the value of maybe 2 denotes someone who's a female. So
Mm-hmm.
once you introduce values, it means you will have to code gender
Yeah.
as numeric. So you know very well gender is a string.
Yeah.
But because you're about to use a computer, then we will have to code gender as a numeric. And then in terms of observation, we will be using 1 and 2 to represent male and female.
Yeah.
So we will select numeric.
Mm-hmm.
Then let's go to the next one. So like I said, I'm going to explain to you the role of each of these columns.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we had width. Now, the role of width is to restrict the number of characters in a response. And I will
Mm-hmm.
explain. So at the moment, we're having by default 8.
Yeah.
So what that means is the software at the moment, if you key in some sort of answers, that answer should not surpass 8 characters. As I
Okay.
say, all of width is to restrict the number of characters in a response. If I
Mm-hmm.
adjust it, assuming I'm collecting name of maybe my respondent, and then I adjust that to 3. So what will that mean? It will mean if your name is Ivy, the software will accept. If your name is
Mm-hmm.
Job, the software will accept. But if
Mm-hmm.
your name is George, the software will not accept because George has more than 3 characters. That is what it
Okay.
means there.
Okay.
So with the default, which is 8. So let's just have it back the way it was. But at least uh, in your mind, you know what's the role of width. Uh, the next one is decimal. Again, unless necessary, you know when to use decimal point. What I mean here is if your variable is something like gender, you cannot say you're 1.5 male. Doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. So
Mm-hmm.
you will adjust to 0. So
Mm-hmm.
decimal, only use decimal when it's relevant.
Mm-hmm.
The next one we have is
Label.
label. So I tend to explain label more like an adjective. So we're saying we want to provide more details about the noun. So we created the name gender. That's a noun. So we want to provide more details. So the same way I've maybe envisioned a certain question might not be the same way maybe the analyst will see. Remember, maybe not really maybe during the whole data process is not a one person's job. You
Mm-hmm.
realize maybe someone who was doing data collection might not be the one doing analysis. Maybe the one
Mm-hmm.
who did analysis not is not writing the report.
Yeah.
So label, we're just saying, can we provide more details about the name we have just created? So what I suggest here is this is where now you can paste the entire question. So if you had maybe used the earlier on suggestion, you're using question number as a way of identifying your variables, then having the label with the entire question that was now in the questionnaire will help a lot for someone else who's going to now interact with your data. So under label, we'll now be putting the entire question. So in this case, gender is a bit straightforward. So maybe let me just write there respondent gender. So we're just saying your label is providing some meaning to your label. The normal way we understand label. Now we I mentioned
But
earlier
but
on
it
about values.
it can accept
Is
you
it?
to copy like the whole question from the questionnaire, or you just summarize it.
It's good you summarize it. So
Okay.
the goal here is just for communication purposes. Like at least
Okay.
somebody know what your labels are.
Okay.
Let's talk about values. I talked about the one and two as a way of identifying male and female. Now, this is where you put those one and two at the value part. So again, click on it. Now we'll say the value of one put it as male, and then you add the value of two. You have it as female. Also, you add.
The ones who refuse to respond or don't answer that question, is that where I put my 999 or something, or don't know
Perfect.
X, whatever. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that in the next column.
Okay.
So the next column is on missing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, so let's talk about missing. What are scenarios whereby you can have missing cases and it's not a compromise on the survey? Let me put that as a question. What do you think? A situation, I think I've already given a hint. Like one of them,
Yeah.
somebody doesn't want to respond.
Yeah.
Uh,
If someone doesn't want to respond, that is not a missing. Is a missing would be where they skipped to ask the question. But if someone said, I don't want to say, I mean, that's not a missing value. They've given a value, right?
correct. So there are two scenarios. So one of them we've just mentioned. It's not an. It's okay. We're saying it's a missing, but it's not a missing. I'm sure we understand each other.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not a
yeah.
missing.
Okay, sure, I
It's an
get. Mm-hmm.
it's an occurrence that happened during the data collection process, and now that has to be reported. Okay. So yes, you have put it well. There's one instance where somebody says, "No, I don't want to give you that answer," and then
Mm-hmm.
two, there's a situation whereby uh, so this one when I say the person doesn't want to give you that answer, that means the answer is there, but the person doesn't want to give you. So if you come and ask me today about my M-Pesa PIN number, of course you know what to expect, but that doesn't mean I don't have an M-Pesa PIN number.
Exactly.
Good. And then there's the second scenario whereby the variable is totally missing. So you have rolled
Yeah.
out a survey, you're already going out there, but now the variable is not there. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like they're not willing to participate. Okay. So
Okay.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
with the context of this class, of course, we'll work under the assumption that we're not going to have any missing cases in our observation.
Mm-hmm.
But in an official rollout program, you would now introduce values the same way you said. So you can maybe say, in an event that the respondent is not willing to participate in the survey or maybe to answer a certain question, let that be represented with a value, for instance, of 9. So there's this part of discrete missing value, whereby now you can introduce values to represent that scenario. And this is for communication purposes. So if somebody
Mm-hmm.
comes and maybe look at your later and the observation are 1, 2, 1, 2, and then a 9 appears somewhere, they will not be surprised like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, so that 9 denotes somebody not willing to respond to that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I hope we're in there. So
Yeah.
yeah, at
Okay.
some point you do that. But in the scope of this class, let's work with the assumption no missing values.
Okay. So we
Now
just
for
select
the
none.
column, yes, so we just leave it at none.
Okay.
Now we're still interacting with the interface. So let's talk about column. So of course,
Mm-hmm.
these softwares tend to have versions over and over. So these are some of the things we used to enjoy way back. So when you wanted to adjust the size of a column, you could do that using numbers. Or now you adjust from 8, for instance, to something like 100. Okay, so the size of the column will adjust to that margin that you have just placed there. But we are beyond that. So right now, if you just want to adjust the size of a column, you don't need to use values there. So just take your cursor in between any of the columns,
Drag it.
and then you'll see the arrows pointing sideways, and then you just drag.
Mm-hmm.
You're good to go. So let's talk about alignment. Again, alignment not necessarily useful during our analysis processes, but when you're working with computers, you will know that numbers are always aligned to the right, and then
Mm-hmm.
string characters are always aligned to the left. So if you write someone's name, it will start from the left side of that box. The numbers will be on the right side of the same box. That's all about alignment. Measure. Computers, we go back again a little bit into. So of course, we said we're working in a scientific process. When you're doing data entry, we are borrowing a lot
Mm-hmm.
from the statistical concept. Okay, so the thing is, you need to measure your
Yeah.
variables, and I think it will be interesting because somewhere in this questionnaire we have things, something like mission and core value. Like, how do you measure mission and core value for an organization? That's that's a tricky variable. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, what I'm saying is, no matter what you're doing, if you're deciding to do a research, you must come up with a way of measuring your variable. And I'm one guy that I also believe that I always tell people, like, what is clear, it means it can be measured, and what can be measured, it means it can be achieved. Period.
Yeah.
Nothing less.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
now we have
I
types
lost
of
you. I can't hear you.
variables. So we have nominal. The Okay, so we said how many measures? Three of them. Uh, Nominal, ordinal, scale. Am I still there?
Yeah, but I lost you a bit. Did you define the differences between the three? I know there are three, but did
Not
you
yet.
say what's the difference?
No, we're there now.
Okay, okay.
So we know the two. So when you say
Mm-hmm.
nominal, what a nominal measure. So before we go into all of them, so let me just come clean here. So with the three, the book that now further splits the scale measure into now again interval and ratios. Okay, but I think that I'll leave it to you to go and read. So I'm not going to start teaching statistics here. So what is nominal? We can say nominal variables are now those variables that have no statistical criteria for ranking of the response. I'll explain further. Nominal measure are now the variables that have no statistical criteria for ranking of the response. And a good example is gender. So if you go back to gender, I don't know what rules we followed, but out of nowhere, and I'm happy that you also agreed, we just decided that let one be male, let two be female. Nobody gave us that criteria. So it
Yeah,
means if tomorrow we disagree and then you say, no, I want females to be one and males to be two, it's still the same. It will work. Okay?
yeah, yeah,
So what we're saying here is the one and two that we are going to male and female are not actually weights to those categories. They're
yeah.
just a way of identifying them. That's what I meant
Mm-hmm.
when I say there's no criteria for ranking of the response.
Yeah,
Okay? So
yeah.
you can read further on the same. So there are better books out there. But let's talk about ordinal. Ordinal, the same way it sounds, order. Ordinal order.
Mm-hmm.
So ordinal variables are now those variables that have some sort of statistical criteria for ranking of now the response. A good example now are now the Likert scale. Those questions whereby somebody can either strongly agree to strongly disagree. You will note that with such questions, the most positive person is always assigned the highest weight. So if you
Mm-hmm.
strongly agree, you'll get a weight of 5.
Yeah.
If you strongly disagree, you get a weight of 1. And
Mm-hmm.
now interchange that order, you've messed out the statistical meaning behind that question.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't enjoy the luxury as male and female, whereby we say if we disagree, we can switch position. But
Yeah.
with ordinal, 1 means the most negative person, and 5 means the most positive person. And I think we'll also see how do you analyze such type of question, because
Mm-hmm.
even in the questionnaire, if you look at the mission and core value, that is the question 3, you realize that now you have like 9 attributes that are measuring one variable. Like if you want to understand mission and core values, you need to come up with 9 different attributes. So we will also see how do you maybe come up with the analysis of this one, because I disagree with those people who just do descriptive analysis for such question. I don't come from
Okay.
that school of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I think for role, we are not going to discuss it here because it's more of how the software works. So I'll leave it like that. But I believe by now we are now a little bit aware of almost all the columns. So when you're doing the next question, at least you'll be able to flow now.
Okay.
Now let's do the second question, which is age. So we're still calling the variable. So I'll have age. Age is the mode. I'll adjust decimal to 0. On the label, I prefer copy pasting, so I'll copy the entire question. For the values, the value of 1, now the grouping, which is 18 to 24. The value of 2, the second one, is 25 to 34. The value of 3, 35 to 44. So again, be careful. There's a difference between above 55 and 55 and above. What do you think?
So above 55 and over 55.
55 and above and above 55. I think there's a difference, right?
Yeah, they're different.
Good. So there's one which you need to accommodate the person who's 55 years old. So bear that in mind. So in this case, we will say 55 and above.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in terms of measure, gender will be nominal, age will be ordinal, do occupation.
So how are we labeling occupation?
Occupation, just occupation. As I said,
No,
preferably
when we go to
how
the labels, just
yes, just have it
occupation.
as
I
occupation.
mean, okay.
Yeah, occupation. So if it's a little bit straightforward, just have it like gender. Just gender is just
Okay.
gender.
Okay.
But again, remember we said preferably you can also paste the entire question. Like just be lazy, put the question there.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. I like that of being lazy. Just be lazy.
yeah, okay. Relationship. So there's there are also rules in as far as creating variable names are concerned in SPSS.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, having like a variable, let me use an example of marital status. Uh, you cannot have spaces between marital and status. So in
Mm-hmm.
SPSS, you can either use an underscore or you combine it as one word. Okay. So with now this P4 I'll have the name as relationship, and then now label is when I'll have the entire text. Now relationship
Okay.
contributor.
Okay.
On the values, same drill. Occupation on measure, I'll have it as nominal. Relationship also nominal.
Okay.
I think we are now okay with the such type of question. Like we call them single select. I want you to use
Mhm.
multiple select. Uh, let's understand this. When single select, it means the respondent has only one option to choose. Like if you're a male, you're a male. You can be both.
Yeah.
And the question also occupation. I don't know if you can be employed and still be self-employed, but the idea here is you only choose one. Uh, let's look at station. I think that's a bit different. So if you look at station, it's an open-ended question.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the type of response you're going to get are the ones we refer as qualitative. So of course, I know it's beyond what we'll cover, but maybe at some point, if you would want to learn something like in vivo or max
Yeah.
QDA,
That be the
qualitative.
next class. That be the next class. Please note it down en vivo.
So when you're collecting now qualitative, like for instance station, you've given that your respondent has to tell you by writing like, hey, tell me whatever is happening there. So let's try and see how we can code this type of question, and then we go now to the multiple response.
Okay.
Have station. Now station numeric, because now they're going to write down, so I'll have it as string. Now I'll make some adjustment. Now I say, okay, I'm sure there are certain stations that will have names that have more than 8 characters. Like Mukurueni. I think Mukuru. You understand what I mean? Like there are
Yeah,
names
yeah.
of places, so you can adjust the 8 now to something reasonable, maybe 20 characters.
Mm-hmm.
Then now on the label part, we said the idea is to provide more information. So maybe you can say this is branch or the sub branch. That should make sense to anybody. Okay, now let's switch gears to section B.
Mm-hmm.
So section B, if you look at the question, which were your sources of awareness about National Social Security Fund? Of course, there's some instruction which says now the research assistant is not supposed to read out. So of course,
Mm-hmm.
we're telling to control the direction of that research. Let it flow the way it will go. And lastly, they're saying it's a multiple mention, which means you're giving the respondent freedom to choose all that applies to their scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So that means somebody might have obtained information about an SSF by listening to radio, or maybe again they also bought some newspaper. So you don't want to tie that person to just one. That's why we're calling it multiple response. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm the last part. Others specify. What comes in your mind with that question? Others specify.
You will still have more strings. People will give their own other options that are not in what you provided.
Perfect. So we have a list of platforms, and we're saying in an event that the respondent has a platform which is not among the one listed here, then
Mm-hmm.
they can write to us.
Yeah.
So how do we code such type of questions into SPSS? Okay. So with this type of question, let me explain on this qualitative part, because other specifying again it's qualitative, and SPSS is not a qualitative term. So what happens in such a case? So assuming you ask the same question on social sources of awareness, And then maybe one respondent mentioned Facebook, another one maybe mentioned Instagram, and maybe another one mentioned something like LinkedIn, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you realize all these text or this string response that you're getting, a researcher has no choice but now to read, unless now in vivo comes to your rescue. So you read those information that you are getting, and then now you come up with what you call themes. Now we call it thematic analysis.
Yeah.
Themes is basically saying, instead of you reporting Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, how about you generalize and say, okay, these three are social media platforms. So
Yeah.
you will go and report now in your final document. You're not taking it to SPSS. So once you've read all those texts and then you come up with those themes, now this theme is what you will take now to your final report. Maybe you say, apart from radio, TV, and newspaper, there are three respondents who are mentioning social media.
Yeah.
I think that can work.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the closed-ended part. Now, the radio, TV, and newspaper. How do you code that in SPSS? So in handling multiple response question, you will have to treat the response as variables. So what it means here is you will treat radio as a variable, even though you know very well it's not a. And what's the idea? The idea is if somebody check on radio, that means they were saying yes to radio. They were admitting radio was one of their sources of awareness.
Yeah.
If somebody never checked on radio, it means they were saying no to radio. So again, this is more or less like a yes and no type of question, whereby you're saying, was radio one of the sources of awareness? Yes or no? Was TV one of the sources of awareness? Again, yes or no? So when I go to my SPSS, so I'll go straight and introduce now radio as a variable. Yes, I know very well it's not a variable, but later I will be teaching you on how to make sense out of it now. So I'll start with radio. Of course, now that I'll binary 1 and 2. So I will have it as numeric. What you say no to radio. I'll click OK, and then on measure, I will have it as nominal. TV, I'll have it as TV is television. Then you can copy paste. Again, you can be lazy. You don't have to repeat the whole process that you've done. If it's a question that newspaper, adjust to 0. Newspaper. Then again, copy, paste the response. On measure, I'll have all of them as nominal. If I interchange, no pressure. So let's just use those three. I know we don't necessarily need to exhaust all of them. At least we're getting the idea. So, uh, so we've interacted a lot with the variable view. How about we switch gears? What happens at the so let's go to the so the view is where you do the data entry, right? You've coded your so assuming you have now pieces of questionnaires with you. Now the job is just to key in, transfer now observation from the piece of paper to now the software. And that's what we define data entry. So now that we don't have questionnaires with me. So I will create like an assumed observation, at least 10 respondents. So if I had questionnaire and maybe the first respondent was a male, so I'll just go and write there 1. But now make sure, so if you go to this icon where you're seeing 1 and A, the pink one, where my cursor is at the moment, go and click there so that you see numbers. I don't want you to see the labels.
Are you in the
There
data
you can.
view or still on? Are you in the data view on the variable? Oh yeah, you are still on the variable. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we're doing, assuming you're doing data entry.
Yeah.
So, and you want to move fast. So you just in numbers. So instead of writing male, how about you just write 1? Because it
Mm-hmm.
means the same thing.
Yeah.
Those I said, go to this icon A1. Make sure now whatever you're seeing here is value, not the label.
A1. Okay.
Is it or red in color? I'm not so sure.
So I choose the values. I choose that icon.
So if you click on it, are you seeing
Mm.
what is happening on my side? Like once I click on it, I can see male and female. If I click on it again, I see 1 and 2.
Okay. All
So
right.
the
I
idea
see.
is during the entry
Right.
process, now you better be seeing 1 and 2 for you to move fast. Okay, so we're going to work with 10 respondent. And then again, data entry is all about speed. Actually, there's no skill there. So you're just employing someone because they can move fast. You're telling them you have 100 questionnaires in a day.
So did you have to
So
enter
that's,
the first one? Can you refresh how you did that one too?
yeah. So how about I do for age and then you can do for both on your side?
Okay.
So I'm working under the assumption that maybe the first respondent is a 1 in as far as age is concerned.
Okay.
So I'm just creating these numbers because I don't have questionnaires with me.
Okay. Like repeat. What was the red one and A meaning? Like did I just select that so that I get a 1 and 2 instead of a male female, right?
So what you're doing is you will check how someone has responded on the questionnaire. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have the questionnaire is filled.
Yeah.
So of course there's a value that has been assigned to that category, right?
Yeah.
For instance, if you look at age, we said 1 denotes those who are between the age of 18 to 24.
Okay.
So if somebody answered 18 to 24 in the questionnaire, now under age in the software, I will come and have 1.
Oh, I see.
And what that one is, that's what I said. You click on this A and 1 button here.
Oh, I see. I get it. Okay, I get it.
Perfect. So we do all the way to relationship. Make sure you have some observation. For station, you know the drill. You will
Mm-hmm.
have no choice but wait.
To type here.
So when so that we start on radio, TV, and newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Notify me once we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm. I'm good.
Okay, so let's go to the multiple response one.
Mm-hmm.
So again, let me work under the assumption that the first respondent said radio, like yes for radio,
Mm-hmm.
but they said no for TV, but again yes for newspaper.
Okay.
The second one, maybe they say no to radio, yes to TV, no to newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to this third one. So I'm creating a scenario so that we learn from it later. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
individual that I'm two, two, two. This guy never mentioned radio, never mentioned TV, never mentioned newspaper, and again, is not even captured on the other specify.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for the rest, now you can just proceed randomly. So just under that then respondent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's try and make sense out of what we've been doing so far. So the idea, so what we have covered is more like how you would have coded the questions. Now you have entered the observation. How about
Yeah.
you get some frequency? So let's start with the single select part. So if you are to make sense out of now the single select question, it's a bit straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, I know this is part of descriptive analysis, which we'll cover later, but now it's really simple. With now SPSS, if you just go to analyze, you'll see that Now you have a chance for descriptive statistics and then frequencies. So remember I mentioned something about descriptive statistics where I say you will what will guide you with the or the okay, let me collect myself here. So what I'm saying is if you are doing descriptive analysis, you need to be guided on what type of analysis are you doing. So we said if your are categoricals, like now for instance what you are dealing with, we said you will do frequency table. If that you will do measures of central tendency. So of course I'm just giving you like a glimpse right now, and then later is when I focus more with analysis. So I said analyze descriptive and then frequencies. Now you have two options. You can either enter stepwise, like one variable at a time, or you can enter all of them. Okay, so I can select gender, for instance, and then transfer to the other side. So let me just all of that. Let me do all of them at once. So I can also select age in years, also occupation. So of course, later we will interact with the options provided here. So let me just go and click OK for now. And as you can see now, I have my frequency table. Maybe come up with some visualization from charts. Like, can you come up with charts now from these results? So I think later we'll also see how to save our work. So we say, how best can you transfer such analysis to another person? If I was I'm the one writing the report, how best can I transfer my file to someone else? So I think we'll see that later. For now, so for relationship again, I think you can just extract frequency. I think it works here. So analyze descriptive statistics and then frequency. So how do you make sense out of the multiple response one? If we go to the multiple response, remember we said what? There was no question as radio. There was no question as TV. There was no question as newspaper. Instead, with a response. So what was the question? The question was sources of awareness. So basically, what it means there is we have no choice but to create subsets. So I'm bringing in again the aspect of a set and a subset, whereby now I'll say I have a set awareness, and then inside awareness, now I have subset radio and newspaper. So how I go to
Are you still there, George? I think you. Okay.
I'm trying to adjust my connection. Uh,
Yeah,
how are
I
we
can
doing
hear
now?
you now.
Are we okay? So I was introducing how to handle the multiple parts. So by now you should know that there is no question as radio, there was no question as TV, there was no question as newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, these the response and the question sources of awareness. So you need to communicate that with the software. So I'll say, how about I create a set called awareness, and then inside awareness, now I have radio, TV, and newspaper. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will analyze and then and I so which one is a set and which one is a subset. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll define the variable set. So you can right click so that you see the variable name. It's up to you. If you right click on any of the variables there, you have a
Mm-hmm.
chance to either create the variable name or the labels. So for me, the variable names works best for me. To be much easier. So I want to transfer now the subsets to this other side. So I'll say radio was the first one, TV was the second one, and newspaper was the third one. So I identify the subsets. The next thing that the software wants to know is how have I coded my variables? Variable are
Mm-hmm.
coded. So what it means here is the software basically wants to know which of the response am I interested with. Am I interested with those individuals who selected a platform or those who didn't select a platform? So of course, logic tells you we are interested with those who selected a platform because
Yeah.
we want to inform the organization on the performance on their different platforms. So I will assign a value of one because one was the first for you. The software will concentrate more with those who did yes to a platform. Now let me give it a name. I'll call it awareness. Now I'll type further and say now awareness means sources of awareness. So remember the role of label is just to provide more information about the variable name.
Mm-hmm.
That's what. So sources of awareness on NSSF. I think that is straightforward. Then you have to add.
Mm-hmm.
After you add, you can now close this interface. Now let's get some results. So we need to now get some frequency. So I'll go back again to analyze multiple response. Now you can see I have more than just the option of defining the variable set. So this time I can be able to get frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
So transfer sources of awareness to the other side and then OK. So we are halfway through. That means it is one thing to come up with a results output, and then it's also another thing to make sense out of the results you've just created.
Mm-hmm.
So now we need to make sense out of now our results. And let's start with the case summary. Now we have some interesting information. So the valid n, n denotes population, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, since we are having few respondents, around 10 of them, so both the sample and the population are the same. So valid
Mm-hmm.
n is just n, because we're having a small letter n on this case. So what does this mean? We know very well we have 10 respondents in this data set. So that is the population. But
Mm-hmm.
it's telling us that the valid sample population is 8. And it even
Mm-hmm.
goes far to tell us that we have two missing. We, if somebody goes to, they're not seeing any missing, but the software tells you that
They're two missing.
two. What do you think? What do you think?
Is it because they said no? All of them, they said no to everything. Those are the missing
Yes,
ones.
yeah, the guy we created deliberately that they're saying
Mm-hmm.
no to all the. Yes, so the software is only interested with those who said yes to a platform.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it didn't say what it should do with those who didn't select a platform. That's why it's coming out as missing.
Mm-hmm.
Question authenticity of it unless it makes sense because
Mm-hmm.
there's no the database, but the result says missing. So how
Yeah.
do we fix two? I will not have choice but introduce a new grouping, which will now label none of the above, because now people not doing radio, not doing TV, not doing newspaper. So this is the above. I'll go back again to my variable view,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll introduce a variable called none. I'll have it as I'll adjust decimal to 0, and then I'll label it as none of the above. Now the question is, who belongs to this none of the above? The person who says no to all the platform, right? So if I go to data view, we need to key in now observation for none or the none of the above subset.
Mm-hmm.
The logic behind none of the above is if you are saying no to radio newspaper, that is when you will have one or yes under the none of the above. So the first person close, so it won't belong in the. So I'll have it as 2. Also, the second person, I'll have it as 2. The third person, I'll have it now as 1. Belongs to that group
Mm-hmm.
called nano. I think I'm with the now 2, 2. So these are the third person. There you go. You have it. Perfect. So I think I've already